Dark Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Dark Slab Audio and our 6th Master Series. I do believe this is the 4th video in our 6th Master Series session templates. And in this video, we want to talk about our engineering mix template. So if you remember that basically the idea here is that this is an area to work with finished files. That means any of those files you can listen to on their own and they sound great, okay? Because when we bring them into the mix session and the engineering session, that the only time we're really doing editing and processing is to make things work better in the mix together. Sometimes you have to re-equalize a little bit. Sometimes you might have to edit a little things a little bit differently so that things work a lot better together in the mix. And that's it, okay? You really keep that in mind. So the idea here is that once we've got done in the last phase, that at any time we can have that session open at the same time, go back in there, adjust those files, rename them, and then drag them back in here instead of doing the work here. This is a mix session. It can be quite complicated all on its own because every moment in time is of utmost importance, and sometimes every section you have to deal with as its own separate mix for it to come out right. So basically a simple layout is that when I'm working with this is that I have it set up to bars and seconds so that I can see both while I'm working. I have either flags or arrange sections that's set up in transitions and movements, and I just move that around once I start dragging files in, you know, for whatever the song dictates. And I normally work like that, and you can rename that to bridge or chorus or whatever you want, but I normally work like that because it's much easier. So basically in here, I've got a track for track notes. I've got a tone generator to check if I'm having a tuning issue and a tuner on there most of the time. And then I basically have a song folder that's set up for most of the instruments that I would be normally using in the type of productions I work in. And you can erase, delete ones you don't need, add some that you might need for different productions. But it's basically set up. Same with subgroup buses, group buses, and things like that. Now, if you remember from my downloadable notebook, that after recording phase is the editing and the processing. A good majority of that would have been done in the last session. And the light editing and light processing we do here is maybe on the individual tracks to make them work better with themselves as a group, to make the groups work better, to make the subgroups work better, to make the groups work better. And sometimes we have to readjust a little bit when we start mixing the other groups together. So sometimes you have to do editing and processing adjustments to make things work better as a mix, but it shouldn't be any more than that. So basically when you get in there, you have, like, I'll give you an example. Like if I get in the song folder, that I have most of the instruments set up that I would normally use. And as an example, like the vocals here, we've got main vocals, backing vocals, and like the choir section, you know, that are set up in their own folder. Now those ones would be going to a subgroup, that you would have a subgroup for each one of those, and each one of those would be directed to a group bus so that I can do any editing processing on those subgroups of those groups as I'm mixing things for any adjustments that might need to be happening. Now those groups will be going to a leveling bus so that on the final mix, after everything's mixed together and every section's mixed together, that I can go in here with automation or whatever and adjust things, that it needs to go up a little bit there, down a little bit there, up a little bit there, does that mean that makes sense? And those, as a final mix, are just going out to some main processing buses that for light processing on a finished mix. Maybe some noise reduction, console emulation, equalization, stereo field work, mid-side work, reverberation, echo effects, saturation, compression, and limiting. And on the back end of those, I've got frequency analysis, dynamics analysis, and stereo analysis going just to an out bus before the main out, just to catch anything that might be a problem. And it's set up pretty simply. I mean, the routing's pretty simple, the setup's pretty simple, and back behind it, I've got some VCAs set up just in case I like to use some VCAs. I do sometimes I don't, depending on the production, and some FX buses with FX chains or, preset, set up, processors for delays, echo effects, chorus, reverberation, stereo field, any other type of effects, saturation, and noise that I may or may not use throughout the production. I've found that most of the time, either on those group buses, on those subgroup buses, or on the individual tracks is normally where any light processing normally will happen. But there has been time that I use some FX chains, so I do have some FX buses on there and some VCAs just in case. So it's set up very simply. It's not that complicated. The majority of the time you're probably going to spend setting up your song folder to where you've got basically what you need. So I go into Symphony that I know that a lot of times it's like, I'm not sure if I'm going to have any Symphony at all, but I can sit there and duplicate these tracks for strings and brass and, wind instruments or whatever. And it doesn't take long to just duplicate those tracks, right? The routing's already set up, set up some more buses. Sometimes I gotta go down here and change the names of some of these subgroups or add some or subtract some, and it doesn't take, the majority of it is set up and done so that it's just go. Just drag in those nice files, lay them where they're supposed to be. After I've looked through the files, I go through here and adjust this to where it's complementary to what I'm going to be dragging in, and then I make sure there's buses, subgroup buses, and group buses for that, and then I'm pretty much done, which doesn't take long at all, and I can get to mixing. Because if you've watched, my master series, and when I start mixing, that it can be very complicated. A lot of the things I talked about would have been done in the last phase, and this is just for mixing. But sometimes you do some complicated things when you're mixing, because you got this section, you've got it all mixed out, all those tracks, subgroups, and groups mixed well that you got to change for this transition, and it's got to change again for this next movement with the automation as far as levels are concerned and panning and other things that are happening, and it can get a little complicated. So having this set up as well as possible so that it doesn't hamper your workflow, it doesn't slow you down, it's not really cluttered with a lot of stuff from the last session, so that you can really focus on your light editing and light processing when you need to make the mix work well together whenever there's issues, and to get to mixing so that you can get a mix down that's sent to the mastering engineer, what may be you, that can format for distribution. And sometimes it can be a little complicated all on its own, but the brunt of the other work that's been done to the files should have been done in the last session, and you're just doing light editing and processing here and more worried about mixing. So, and the most processing you're probably going to do is on your main buses on the whole mix. Once you get the mix all done, you might do a little stereo field work. You might do a little bit of saturation. You might do a little bit of equalization, but and it's probably going to be light work, because you're going to have gone back and as you mix things together, you go, that subgroup on those vocals needs to adjust it a little bit. So I'll throw an EQ on here or something, or that guitar, that lead guitar need a little bit of adjustment there back here, or I'm going to go back to those main tracks and adjust it just a little bit so it works better in the mix. 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. you know, and that takes time. And we know as mix engineers that can be kind of a headache sometimes, but it's not that heavy processing and heavy editing that we would have done in the last session. Like I talked about my first masters, that would have probably been done during the recording when you were recording engineer, so you don't have to do that as little as possible. And any stuff you did had to do, you caught it there in the recording engineering session, and did any editing and processing that you might have done, to have them as finished files, so that they're great files like you're sending to a professional. Pretend you're sending your files to Chris Lordale, and he's going to charge you $10,000 to mix your song. Those files better be right, bro. He's going to mess with your song for 6 months, you know. They better be right. He's going to do some very light editing, some very light processing. He's going to get to mixing. If he's got to mess with all other stuff, he's going to be on the phone calling you and telling you better call a bank, right? Because he's going to be working on your song a while. So you want to avoid that, and you as the mix engineer don't want to have to deal with all that. You will find that you become a much better mix engineer, that your workflow goes better, your work tempo goes better, and you're a much happier engineer because you're down to mixing. You know, you're really mostly focused about mixing, and it's as you're mixing stuff, you're like, I might want to push the EQ up on those vocals just a little bit now that they're sitting in the mix a little bit. Ah, yeah, right there. And you'll be focused more on, you know, the bass guitar needs to go up a little bit here, and that part needs to go down there for that section. You go up there, that, and the drum needs to get kicked up there, and needs to kick down there, and the vocal needs to go up, down there, and you'll be busy mixing. And sometimes that can get really complicated when you take every moment in time in consideration, and every section can be its own mix. Don't worry, you'll be busy enough, trust me. So, and at any point anything's really out of whack as far as the file is concerned, you can always go back into the other session that's open, that, you know, like this session is named Bob's Song Engineering Mix Phase, and the other one was Bob's Song Creation Recording Phase. So, and then you can go back, and the mastering session will be set up the same way, so that you can go back to any one of those and go, that needs to be adjusted a little bit somewhere, and you can rework it for whatever phase you're working at. Does that make sense? So I don't want to get it too complicated. I want to keep it as simple as possible. That way that it's basically set up like that as well as possible. So each one of those sections and those things are set up as well as possible for how you work. And that will evolve and develop as you become a better mix engineer. And if you have that mindset and that is your focus, light editing, light processing to help things work better together in the mix, and get to mixing and have things set up really well to deal with the files you have with that in mind as well as you can, and the way you like to work and the kind of productions you work on, and you'll be much happier engineer, and you will probably do, I will say you will do a much better job as a mix engineer. So I hope that makes that easy to understand, and I hope that I kind of showed you this template, how it's laid out, to keep it as simple as possible, to reduce the clutter and keep the focus on the mixing task as an engineer, like you are a mix engineer, and that's all this session is set up for, and that's your job here. The other stuff was set up for the last session. You do that there, not here, to avoid clutter and a mess, so that you can get focused on what you should be doing here, and that's mixing the production and getting a mix down. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video in our 6 Master series on session templates, and I will see you in the next video.